Okay, picking up where I left off. Who were the Moabites? The Moabites were a Transjordanian people descended from Lot. They generally were hostile towards Israel and appeared to be somewhat insignificant at the time of our incident here in Numbers 31. Later, however, they became a significant nation and were consistently hostile to Israel along with Israel's neighbors. Moab figures prominently in the Old Testament period as a nation all the way up into the exile, but after the conquest of Babylonian, Persia, and Alexander, they are only known as a radical ethnic group. At the time of our incident, Moab accompanies a territory 30 miles south of these events. You can read about them in Numbers 22 through 25. What was Israel doing there at the time of this event? Israel had come up from the wilderness journeys and was camped in the plains of Moab across from Jericho. They were preparing to cross the river Jordan to begin taking possession of the land. They were at the end of their 40 years of wandering, but they were still in the desert surroundings. They had been resisted by the Transjordanian chieftains during their travels, and they had been victorious in several unprovoked combat encounters. Israel had been forbidden by God to attack Moab or to take their land, Deuteronomy 2:9. And they had already passed Moab's territory, but Moab's chief, Balak, was nonetheless afraid of Israel and attempted to mount an unprovoked campaign against them. Having been refused the right of passage on the Eastern King's Highway, Israel had traveled north from the Sinai Peninsula through the way of the wilderness, just to the east of various Transjordan nations of Edom, Moab, and Heshbon. The conflict with the Amorite Shilan, ruler of Heshbon, created a passageway from the Sinai desert over the river Jordan. The pathway would have been some 30 miles north of the Arnon River, then northernmost border of Moab. Since Israel had already defeated Moab's protector nation state, the part of the Amorite kingdom controlled by Shehan, Balak was smart enough not to launch a normal military attack on unsuspecting Israelites camping down in the plain, getting the last-minute instructions, laws from God, and generally resting up for the march across the Jordan into Palestine, but decided to attempt to use sorcery against Israel. So he consulted with his military advisors, superiors, which were mainly Midianites, and they persuaded an internationally known sorcerer romantic to travel from Mesopotamia to Moab to place a curse on Israel. The negotiation of the account is given in Numbers 22 through 24. Balak takes Balaam, who's the sorcerer basically, up to the mountains overlooking where Israel is camped, implying that Balak is substantially north of his territory and is now in Amorite territory, and assists Balaam in trying to curse Israel with powers from the local gods of each mountain. Balaam is not allowed by God to place a curse on Israel, but instead pronounces a blessing and prophecies of Israel's eventual rulership and future Messiah. Balak, who is disappointed that he cannot get God to help him defeat Israel and drive them out of their land, is angry at Balaam. You can read about that in Numbers 24:10. Indeed, it looks like the tables are turned. So, the final verse of chapter 24, Balaam is leaving Balak's presence, setting off for home, and Balak beginning his long ride home as well. It seems as Israel is safe from an unprovoked attack by Moab and Midian, and they can prepare for the crossing of Jordan in peace. They're dwelling opposite Moab, Numbers 22:5, and so do not have any interchanges with the Moabites or the Midianites at this time. Israel seems poised to enter the promised land and get on with their destiny, but not so. For in chapter 25 we have an amazing story that will be remembered in shame and horror by Israel throughout its history and the events of idolatry of Baal Peor. So the whole thing in Numbers 31 actually begins in Numbers 25. The cultic center, Beth Peor, and the worship of Baal Peor became symbolic of religious apostasy by subsequent generations. This according to the New International Dictionary of Old Testament Theology. So, chapter 25 of Numbers opens up like this. And Israel stayed stayed, and the people began to have sexual relations with the Moabite women, and these invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods. And the people ate and bowed down to their gods. And Israel yoked himself to Baal Peor, and the anger of Yahweh was kindled against Israel. And Yahweh said to Moses, "Take all the leaders of the people and hang them in the sun before Yahweh, that the fierce anger of Yahweh may be turned away from Israel." And Moses said to the judges of Israel, "Put to death each of those of his men who have yoked themselves to Baal Peor." Notice what happens to the Israelites when they have sexual relations with foreign women. They are put to death. Let me say that again. Notice what happens to the Israelites when they have sexual relations with foreign women. They are put to death. This is an important point. Now, in the small town that they're camped out about 5 miles from Jordan, which was recently captured by Israel from Shean, although Israel had destroyed all the towns, fortified cities, and so forth, according to Deuteronomy 2:36, now that a town was too high for us, outlying villages and hamlets may have been left without damage and would have therefore presented temporary living quarters. There could have also been some local populace of Amorites and Midianites there as well. Then all of a sudden, the Moabite women, or daughters of Moab, start showing up there in large numbers, having traveled in groups from the kingdoms of Moab, 30 miles south of there. Travel in this part of the country, and at this time eventually was done by caravan and under armed guards. So these women start showing up, and the trip would have taken 2 to 3 days. The evidence is generally uniform and mutually corroborating that one day's journey in the ancient world incorporated between 17 and 23 miles. So these Moabite women show up, and with government funding and security guards, having carefully planned this trip and having left all family responsibilities and indefinite holdback to Moab, and the sequence of events runs like this. The Moabite and Midianite, as we know from verse 6, women show up at the Israelite encampment. The Israelite men start having regular sex with them, and the Hebrew indicates extreme lustful abandon. Their first reference to sex does not contain the notion of sacred prostitution that show up in the later step. Then these women invite Israelite men to their religious sacrifices, where meat and wine would have been served, and the Israelites would have not had very much meat during the 40 years. This would likely have been a religious held at religious shrines at the mountain of Peor. Eventually, the shrine of Baal Peor. Although the smaller shrines and high places and even shaded trees would fit the Baal cult. The Israelite men went with them and ate the sacrificial meat. Then the Israelite men would have bowed down to their pagan gods, probably at the part of the ceremony engaged in sacred sex, due to the fertility nature of the Baal god. Then a critical mass of people, Israel in the text, including their leadership, were yoked to Baal Peor. This is a last step, a yoking. It is likely an ancient cultic term, but we don't have much indication of its meaning from history. It could have meant something as formal as joining in the covenant in violation of exclusive Mosaic one they already had, or something as vivid as sexual union with the god through ritual intercourse. Almost any meaning of this word, since it is undoubtedly worse than just bowing down, would be enough to seriously jeopardize Israel's protection by Yahweh. And I'll pick up with this in the next video.